Look at you guys. Well, hey, thanks a bunch for coming today. I'm Mike Clemmons. I'm the president and co-founder of Guild Extracts, and I have both the honor and the privilege of moderating this panel today. You know, before I can do that, though, I think that there's some stuff that we kind of can't not talk about. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have heard that the CDC and the U.S. the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, along with state and local health departments, have been investigating a recent multi-state outbreak of serious lung injury that's been associated with the use of vape products. As of the beginning of this month, the CDC has reported over 1,000 cases over 48 states and have linked as many as 20 deaths to this issue. Investigators believe, but have yet to confirm, that one or more of the additives that are used in the manufacture of illicit vape cartridges are leading to products on the street that are yielding serious health consequences when consumed. Additional research is currently taking place to try to kind of identify the additives and contaminants that are driving this epidemic. And one of the biggest challenges that we're facing, of course, is federal prohibition. You know, the federal government's refusal to remove cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act in favor of a regulated legalization for adult use has resulted in an illicit market in which millions of Americans have access to cannabis products, but without the oversight that's needed to help ensure that products conform to an established safe standard. And so this really highlights the importance of consumer education, where we really need to inform the public on the dangers and the risks of buying cannabis products off the street, and to educate consumers in order to encourage buy-in to carefully thought out state-regulated programs. Even though the additional costs of industry regulation the industry regulatory burdens may present a slightly higher upfront cost to consumers at their point of sale. We've also kind of heard reports of local legislators in certain jurisdictions that are trying to ban vape products altogether. And to me personally, this is terrifying because it can certainly exacerbate an already dangerous situation by taking consumers away from regulated business and pushing them further into illicit markets. At the end of the day, it's really kind of incumbent on all of us to continue to pressure our representatives in Congress to develop a national framework for regulatory control and to demand regulations that help ensure the health and safety of these products across all jurisdictions. So with that said, the future of vaping, you know, kind of may feel to all of us like it's never been more uncertain. And to me, it feels like this has really never been a better time to have this discussion. And I'd like to definitely thank the team at New West Summit for bringing together this, you people and industry professionals in this panel to do what they do best and present an amazing forum to help us separate the signal from the noise and, you know, have better discussions about this rapidly changing and highly fragmented marketplace. So with that said, I'd like to introduce my panel today. I have Seibo Shen from VapeXhale. We have Casey Lee from Bloom Brand and Jesse Kastner from Vessel Brand. And sadly, Jeannette was not able to make it. She also was pregnant, had some stuff come up. So great, well, thanks again, guys, for coming today. You know, and I guess, you know, one of the things that we had planned to really talk about today is the evolution of vaping. And when you look back, ancient Egyptians used to use hot rocks where they dropped their herbs and oils on and create potent vapors they could inhale. Today, the fastest growing segment in the cannabis is by far vapes, but the high-tech devices of the 21st century are certainly far from the humble hot rock roots, and this technology has been really driving new markets for the last several years. You know, I think the data, you know, I was going to ask Jeannette to tell you, but I do know that the data seems to indicate the market is rapidly shifting to vape, and you know, I think it stands in California that right now about a quarter of all legal cannabis sales have been vape products. And you know, I guess Casey, like, what do these shifts mean for your company, for Bloom, and how has it kind of shaped how you guys have been doing business over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, what we focus on is making very good extracts, right? Very good extracts, very good formulations. And we can't really accomplish what we're looking to accomplish with our consumers unless we have the right delivery mechanism. So for us, we have to stay on top of whatever vape technology is the most efficient to deliver our extracts and deliver our strains to our consumer. Otherwise, for us, you know, it doesn't really make sense. We spend all this time formulating product, and then we end up having a device that maybe burns the terpenes or has a bad experience. It really doesn't make sense for us. We need to make sure that the oil matches the device, and that's why we stay on top of the technology.
Great. Have you seen any other shifts recently, like shifts that are associated with this current health crisis kind of impacting the way you guys are thinking about or doing business?
I think, just like in terms of the vape crisis itself, it's really the response from the company, right? Like we know inherently that we have integrity in our process, but how do we translate that and educate consumers about how we're making our oils? Because I feel like a lot of consumers have no idea what's in oil. So for us, it's really about, okay, guys, this is our process. We're doing everything very ethically. I think it's very easy for us to understand why things are happening in a certain way, why there is a vape crisis in the first place. As a vape company, we basically get every technology, every kind of additive, everything sent to us, right? Just because we're a big vape company.
For sure.
And I think there's certain things that have been sent to us that look like oil and that feel like oil that aren't oil, right? They're marketed as vitamin blends and things like that. So we've had this kind of come to us already. We understand the reason for it. So it's our job really just to educate consumers and educate people in terms of our process and make sure everyone understands this is how oil is made and this is how it should be made.
Yeah, we were kind of exploring a little bit in the Ready Room how, cannabis science is kind of an oxymoron these days. I mean, we've had, 80 years of federal prohibition and institutional bias against the science of cannabis, and it's kind of led to, the innovators on the front line, tend to be a lot more alchemists. But, even scarier that, this innovating doesn't stop in California and it doesn't stop in regulated markets. When the innovating happens in, Wichita, Kansas, then what happens is the public becomes the QA QC layer, and I think that definitely can present serious problems for the industry. Now, Seibo, when I met you back in 2014, talking about innovation and technology, you were sweeping industry awards for best new product with the VapeXhale. I love mine, by the way.
Thank you.
It still works after all this time, and definitely still just as effective. Kind of what influence did the market demands for vape solutions have on you, and kind of like, what was the status quo really lacking that drove you to innovate on a desktop level?
Yeah, so I started vaporizing in 1997, so 22 years now, and that's when I first discovered cannabis in college. From 1997 to 2010, I bought over 125 different vaporizers, and I really was espousing the health benefits of vaporization over combustion, but none of my friends would ever convert to vaporization. They loved smoking joints, blunts. More specifically, they loved using moisture conditioning or water filtration through a water pipe. So when I was designing the VapeXhale Evo, I knew that there was a lot of healthy alternatives out there, but I also knew that for the vast majority of people, if something's not fun, they're not going to stick with it. So we were really focused on the user experience to make sure that you would gain the same type of feeling that you would get from smoking, meaning that, many times when you're using a vaporizer, a lot of people tell me, like, if you're used to drinking whole milk, using a vaporizer is like drinking low-fat milk. It's kind of the same, but not quite the same. So we were really focused on making sure that you could get copious amounts of cannabinoids sublimated through the device, and that through the moisture conditioning and the water pipe attachments that you would still kind of have that same communal aspect that you would have utilizing like a bong while you're combusting. And by marrying both the utilitarian functionality of healthy vaporizers and the user experience of water pipes, I think we were able to bridge those gaps, and that's why we were able to win those awards.
Yeah, and I know the following year you kind of made the shift from just dry herb, and you created some attachments that went to allow people to consume extracts through the device, which consequently you also won awards for. Yeah. I know at the time, you were kind of up against people who use dab rigs, and I also remember you told me a pretty funny story about folks that you met through the PTA coming by and wanting to socially enjoy cannabis with you. Do you mind, in a nutshell, sharing that experience with the group?
Yeah, absolutely. So my daughter, who is 9 right now, about 6 years ago when she was 3, I started, taking her to preschool and started getting involved in the Parent-Teacher Association. The preschool is just 2 blocks away from my house, so there was another parent there who had short hair and he had some tattoos, so I naturally gravitated towards him, and he asked, "Hey, do you want to smoke a blunt after this meeting? And I said, well, you know, my house is only 2 blocks away. If you want to smoke a blunt in one hit, I'll show you this new device. So he comes over to my house. We're in our garage, and he sees me using the torch, and I'm lighting up my titanium nail. And the look on his face, I could tell that he was like appalled at what he was looking at, and he asked what we were doing. And I told him, well, we're about to take a dab of cannabis. Anyways, long story short, that was the last time our daughters had play dates together. And my wife was very much like, hey, you know, like my wife did not consume cannabis at the time. She was like, you know, I'm okay with, you know, you consuming cannabis, but if it's starting to affect, you know, our daughter's social lives, well, you know, you got to make a change. And I like to say desperation, you know, leads to inspiration. So even though the device was designed for dry herb, we were able to make a concentrate attachment. And to this day, it's the only convective way to consume concentrates as opposed to the conductive heat through titanium nails or quartz nails.
And to this day, your daughter has friends, more importantly.
To this day, my daughter has friends, and the long story short is I was president of the PTA the year after.
Nice, nice. Now, since then, you also founded Hanu Labs, which is innovating pocket devices. And so I'm going to kind of throw the same question at you, like, you know, what shortcomings in the space kind of led you to develop the Hanu Stone?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been quoted in some articles that I would never design a vape pen. And, you know, I had to kind of eat some crow. But the result, or the reason why we created this device was, number one, now both my parents as well as my in-laws consume cannabis. They would come over and take dabs off the VapeXhale. But one day I noticed as they were leaving my house, they were using their vape pen. And then I asked them, you know, how often are you using these devices? And they told me all the time. You know, they would only use the VapeXhale Evo when they came over to my house, which really hurt my feelings, and I was like, oh man. So just knowing that my parents as well as my in-laws were using vape pens, and if anyone's familiar with the Rossmore, it's a 6,200 unit assisted living facility, and you know, everyone there was also using vape pens, and much like everyone else on this panel, you know, there's ways to do the vape pen and the concentrates correctly, and you could also buy really cheap things and try to fool the public. So I immediately became much more enthusiastic about designing a device that would, you know, really protect the health of my parents and in-laws, and that was the impetus to the Hanu Stone. And we really wanted to really kick up the industrial design, make sure that it didn't resemble anything long and skinny like a cigarette, because we're always talking about health and wellness, and that is why we have this unique design that basically looks like a rock.
Well, it is beautiful. It is definitely beautiful. Awesome.
Thank you.
And all of you, like we said, James couldn't be here. Jesse was kind enough to pinch hit for him. And kind of speaking of innovation and premium hardware, I mean, the Vessel brand has established itself as one of the most trusted names in the vape industry. It's become well known for its innovative designs and for pushing boundaries of what the vaping experience should be. Now, I also tend to not answer or ask questions I don't know the answer to, because I actually have my Vessel pen in the pocket, and I did not get it at this show. But what vacuum did you guys see in the market when you designed a 510 device that was like an order of magnitude more expensive than your traditional vape battery?
Yeah, so we get this question a lot. We retail for $100, and especially as this is an emerging piece of the industry, and you see more people entering it all the time. You know, you can go and get a $20 vape battery if you really want one. And we talk about this all the time in our office, but you know, buy it nice or buy it twice, basically. And you sort of get what you pay for, especially when it comes to batteries. And the way that we looked at it was that the industry didn't need another vape battery unless we could really make it better, if we could elevate the consumption experience. And that's really the ethos that has built our entire business. Right now we're working on vape batteries, but it extends beyond that. But it goes down to our design, the components that we've decided to put into it, the R&D that's gone into it, the factory partnerships that we have that sometimes people forget about, but it does go back to your factories and the relationships that you have there, and the type of quality assurance that you can get from making sure that you have those right kind of partners. And ultimately, when you can build a product that is built well, that is built to last, that is something that people are proud to pull out of their pocket on a panel or anywhere else, that people aren't ashamed to show off, that people want to share with their friends. Ultimately, the price point it doesn't matter as much, right? in addition to that, we do sell products, so we have to be cognizant of the way that we do come to market. And so before we actually even had a product in hand to sell, we did a ton of market research. We tested different price points with different demographics to see what the threshold was, to understand if this is our brand and this is the story that we're telling and this is the level of product that we're bringing to market, what will the market bear, and what is a reasonable price that affords us the opportunity to provide everything that we say that we're going to promise, which is fantastic customer service and warranties and replacements if you need them, and the education that you want when it comes to your vaping. So how can we accomplish that, and also make it so it's accessible for people? And ultimately, that's where we ended up on the $100 price point. And we believe that it's given us the opportunity to not only develop a really fantastic brand and beautiful product, but it also allows us to make sure that we can deliver to our consumers what they expect.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that there's been an interesting kind of crystallization in the market where you have the folks that are price sensitive versus the folks that are value sensitive are starting to, kind of separate. And the fact of the matter is, all of the people that I enjoyed cannabis with in my youth, well, they're my age now. And, they would prefer to have devices that are a premium device that, is going to function as anticipated every time you pull it out of your pocket. I personally, have spent some time looking at my Vessel device, the wood on it, and it sits next to my my MacBook. And if I didn't know better, I'd say
that was the goal.
Yeah, it looks like an Apple, some sort of an Apple stylus, I'll say.
And that's really what we wanted to create, an understanding that the way that the cannabis industry is moving is that, this is something. It's like if you had a fantastic bottle of wine, you wouldn't lock it away in a corner and never show anybody or never talk about it, right? You want it out, you want to share it with friends, you want to talk about your experience, you want to advocate for something that you really believe is a great important part of your life. And so we wanted to build something that people could use in that way and show off in that way.
Yeah, for sure. And I can't help but think that a lot of these dynamics that we're seeing in the cannabis space are, they're not new dynamics. This isn't, these aren't segments that are now just emerging, but these are segments that have been here all along that are now kind of elucidating now that people are coming out of the shadows and, into, kind of the light with what they're doing. I can certainly appreciate the position of your brand because, again, at Guild Extracts, we kind of positioned ourselves in a similar place in the market that, there is a lot of pressure to, do we want to compete with this brand or that brand, or do we want to just do what we do? And, we have some products that, are super accessible at, a very low competitive price point. But the important thing to do when you go and you establish yourself as a more premium brand is it's incumbent on you then to over-deliver on that value proposition. And so when someone buys one of our batters, for instance, and we over-deliver on that value proposition, then they may look at, something that might retail literally for $214 a gram and think, wow, if they over-delivered on this, $25, $30 purchase, what's that? And then as a user sophisticates, maybe they might, be less likely to try to avoid the risk of, spending money and not getting the value when you've already proven yourself in that space. So hats off to you guys for carving that out for yourselves.
Well, thanks.
Again, sadly, Jeannette couldn't make it today. There was a lot that we wanted to kind of talk about with regards to data, but I'm sure that if you pointed yourself over to their group, that you get a lot of insightful information. And then I guess one of the things I do know that I was going to talk to Jeannette about with regards to the data is there's been some interesting data that's been coming out that's been kind of showing how people are starting to incline toward, really wanting this layer of predictability between the product and the customer. And I think it kind of goes back to the same kind of risk-reward dynamic that Jesse and I were just talking about. But as more and more people are creating nomenclature for their products that's connected to the effects, is this something that Bloom is trying to solve for to kind of create that layer of predictability between the product and the customer? And if so, how are you guys doing that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, very relevant. I think having effect-based marketing, it's very easy, right? You're essentially just connecting what somebody wants and giving it to them. I think the problem is that cannabis is a little bit more nuanced than that.
A little bit.
Yeah, just a bit. But no, I think like a blue dream for me and a blue dream for you could have completely opposite effects.
For sure. I think that people, and I've said it before, tend to forget that, the human body is an entourage effect or ensemble effect,
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So to say that, hey, my vape is going to be, make you feel creative, that's pretty grossly wrong. So I think that our goal as a brand is really to get people to identify the strains, right? And they identify what those strains do for them. So we're really trying to shy away from saying, hey, this is the effect, because it's not really accurate. We'd prefer if you guys, just kind of take a look and try the different strains and identify what's good for you. And that's our goal with our brand. And to be honest, it's half the fun, right? Like trying the different strains. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes product R&D in this stage of the game, really great.
Yes.
All right, everybody, let's go outside. We got some products to test. And I guess with that said, though, we're, in this day and age, we're starting to get more and more visibility into the constituents that are in cannabis. And regardless of a strain name, because, I have really seen the looseness in which strains get their names. That often when you have smaller groups, or someone already has an OG Kush, well then we'll call this one Super OG Kush or Platinum OG Kush or something else entirely. And so it's really hard for consumers to then start connecting these strains with effects, because if they get an OG Kush from Bloom brand and then they go and they pick up an OG Kush from someone else, who knows if they're actually getting the same product. Now that we're getting this information about the constituents that are in there, it's interesting. I mean, I've kind of likened this industry many times to this interesting convergence of technology and public policy and social ideology and all of these things coming together, that are making this just behemoth of an industry. And, this technology aspect is, of course, because I'm a nerd, if no one knows me, is really super interesting to me. And so, I guess a question for you, Jesse, is have you guys had conversations around the table about, with, as more and more consumer electronics is getting smarter and is sending data back to the mothership, have you guys talked much about, making smarter devices that can, kind of help build and enforce this layer of predictability between the consumer and the product?
Yeah, so I think technology incorporated into the cannabis industry is just, we're all talking about it. We're all trying to figure out the right way to implement it. And ultimately what we go back to is the data. It's what's driven every single decision. It's what consumers want and what they're demanding, and then how we address that as people who can be innovative in our solutions. And so I think for us, we see the opportunity and we understand the want and the desire to have that level of data, but ultimately it comes down to what can you do on a mass scale with that information, and how can you meaningfully apply it to the masses, each individual touch point. And I don't know that anybody has meaningfully been able to answer that question yet. And I also think that where we're at right now, at least with our consumers, is that nobody is meaningfully raising their hand and saying that I need Bluetooth technology, I need an app to facilitate my consumption experience. And that's not to say that there isn't a place for it and that it won't become a priority for us, but I think where we're at right now is that there are so many players in our space especially, not all of them are doing it to the level that some of us are, and so I think our priority right now is to ensure that what we produce is a premium quality product that elevates the consumption experience and is simple and intuitive. And until we can ensure that sort of standard across the board, I don't know that there is as much value as we think there is for the consumer to incorporate a lot of this really deep technology, these smart devices, into the consumption experience. I think sometimes smoking can just be simple, and that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess, Seibo, I kind of had the same question for you.
Yeah, so VapeXhale, we got our start at a accelerator called Wearable Worlds. They were primarily focused on Internet of Things, so a connected device was always top of mind for us. Like Jesse said, we have gone back and forth about, how useful is this data? We looked at the other connected devices on the market, and based on our research, people use it once or twice and never open up the app again. So to Jesse's point, if when we were designing one, and we are designing one, we wanted to make sure that the application would be sticky. To your point, and to Casey's point, our bodies are very different biochemically, so we really thought having like a Fitbit for your personal cannabis consumption would be a much better way to understand which terpenes, what cannabinoids interact with your body in an optimized way. But for myself, for my VapeXhale Evo, I've already MacGyvered it to be a connected device, so when I'm about 5 miles away from home, it just turns on, so by the time I'm home, it's ready to go.
Done.
Really strong use case for myself.
True innovator.
Yes. So, but in the big picture, I see a lot of different things about connected devices and how effective you could utilize the data. One of the use cases that I've been tinkering around with is, as someone is consuming cannabis, we know roughly every half-gram pod has about 300 puffs, and we have been working with certain point-of-sale applications where if we reconcile purchase data with consumption data, well, we know, Mike, when you're down to your last 40 puffs of Blue Dream.
Time to reach out.
Yeah, and then Ease could send you a discount for 10% off, and we know that conversion rates skyrocket when someone's in purchasing mode. So that's just one simple use case, but I know there's a ton more out there that could be really interesting, but we just want to make sure that it's not just a checkbox that we check, and that it's actually something that is useful and gives the end user some sort of utilitarian functionality that they didn't have before.
Thank you, and I think that there's something kind of interesting that I've seen as an overlap between both your companies, and it actually is now an overlap with Guild Extracts, where at Guild Extracts we had to come to an interesting term that our customer and our end user are two different people, and that's something that a lot of companies who are in our space don't necessarily understand. And I know Jesse Vessel is now starting to branch into kind of a partner relation program, and so now all of a sudden your customer and my customer and my end user are now, there's this added layer of intricacy. Same thing with Seibo and your company with Hanu, where you went from VapeXhale was very much a direct-to-consumer relationship that you built, and now the Hanu Stone is going to kind of depend on adoption, which is going to be facilitated by your brand partners. So now you also have a customer who's different from your end user, and now maybe the needs of data of your customer may change. And so this is just something for, I think as an industry for us to pay attention to, because it certainly raises other questions. When you kind of, we have in our industry a history of discretion is deeply rooted in cannabis culture because of prohibition. And so are people going to, and this is kind of a philosophical question, and all you guys actually know the answer to this probably better than I do, which is are people going to be okay with that data being out there? Are they going to be okay even with metadata being out there? And we all know that we give up a certain amount of privacy to have the smartest phone. Is this something that are we ever going to get consumer buy-in with cannabis that says, okay, well, this data is actually going to help producers like Guild Extracts or like Bloom create better products for me? And while everybody is a little different, we're also a lot alike, and it's just something for us to think about. And so I guess, Casey, when it comes to kind of looking at the evolution and the future of vapes, are there gaps in knowledge currently that, or even in data that you as a manufacturer would like to see elucidated that would kind of help you guys in your product development pathway?
Yeah, I think for us, right now, because the industry's so young, the data is very fragmented, right? Not
Extremely.
everyone's using the same POS system. Even trying to find, looking at a BDS or a headset, for instance,
Right.
You don't really get the full picture. And until the industry starts figuring out ways and overcoming these challenges of data, consolidating platforms, we don't get a full idea of what's actually happening at that point of sale, right? And it's the same problem that you talked about, which is basically our customers are stores. Our customers are not the customers, right? So
Right.
how do we bridge that gap? And I don't think anyone's been able to quite do it so far. And that's the challenge that I'm hoping that we will be able to overcome soon so that we can actually get the right data to produce the right products. I think a lot of it is based on whatever tactics we have available, but it's not very complete. So that's how I feel as a brand.
Great, thanks.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, please do.
So I completely agree with Casey. You know, previously we were a direct-to-consumer brand, so we were able to touch our customers directly, understand what worked for them, what didn't work. And now that we are insulated by the retail store, you know, we are a little bit in the dark. But now we're seeing companies like ESI Logistics, WebJoint now has a direct-to-consumer. So I believe, you know, we are beginning to bridge that gap where there's not that insulation layer, and we'll be able to hear directly from our consumer exactly what they like, don't like, and really improve our products at a greater speed.
Great, and I think that also kind of, you know, illustrates the importance of, you know, and especially in this day and age when we're seeing like a lot of consolidation in the market, and even product manufacturers are starting to exchange their destiny for fate, working with large distributors and losing direct contact with their customers just in order to be able to logistically handle the intricacies of this industry. And so now it creates this whole new kind of layer of complexity, you know, where we have to shift our focuses, like, you know, reapply our sales teams to, you know, doing outreach and education and brand ambassadorship. And it's interesting because like you look into other industries, and I just have yet to really find a beta for this. And it's like we're, you know, once again making friggin' history, you know. And so it's really interesting to me as, you know, again as a manufacturer to see how like these dynamics are going to play out in the market. I know from my perspective, like since pretty much from the time that Guild Extracts was started, like it seemed to us ideologically that, you know, we had, like when we first started, we didn't even really touch vape cartridges. You know, we made top shelf dabs. That's what we did. That was our DNA. Thank you. and then it just, we couldn't ignore it any longer, but we still had to wait for certain technologies to come up. Like if I had, you know, put, you know, my our Guild Extracts product into a plastic Bud Touch cartridge, I just think that at that point that probably wouldn't have represented our brand, and it certainly wouldn't have represented our philosophy. At the time that technology got to a certain point where it then became acceptable, and then we saw that, oh, okay, well now we have this sector of the market that is 4Xing like all of the other products that we make combined, that we're going to have to adapt, and we're going to have to innovate, and we're going to have to drive things forward. I still am looking forward to, you know, a device I can throw in my pocket that's going to give me a, you know, a hit like a mothership. I really do. And so I guess, you know, are there technical hurdles right now that, you know, you guys see from a hardware standpoint that stand kind of between us and the next generation of vape devices, and how do you think that we're going to overcome those? Is it going to be the industry? Is it going to be demand from the industry? Is it going to be engineers overseas? Who's going to solve these problems?
I think a lot of what we face from a hardware standpoint in the industry is simply the sheer amount of products that are in the market and the inconsistency in experience when people can go and buy a $20 or an $8 pen somewhere, and then we have ours, which is and she wasn't. It's just a really different experience, and I think that is going to be one of the biggest hurdles that we face is an education of consumers, especially as more people enter the market. I think also sort of this standardizing of QA and QC and what people are able to bring to market is going to be really key in ensuring that there is safety and confidence in our sector of the market. And I think that's going to be a big technological hurdle, especially in light of everything
certainly
that's going
an ideological hurdle these days. I mean, it's like, you know, with everything that we've been hearing in the you know, in the space out there, you know, we've heard a lot of speculation around, you know, shoddy hardware contributing to these issues, as well as these additives and stuff like that. And so it really kind of, you know, creates this additional pressure for our industry to be a little bit more thoughtful about, you know, taking the next steps. You know, basically, you know, being first to do it right be more important than being first to do it, you know. And how about you, Seibo? What kind of technological hurdles do you guys come across in engineering, you know, that that you foresee, you know, is going to need to be overcome, you know, for a device like yours to, you know, be heads and shoulders above everything else?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. So one of the things is most of the design teams are out here in the States, and most of the engineering teams and manufacturing teams are out in China. So there's a big disconnect, whether it's a language barrier or a culture barrier. I know that most of the factories in China, they've never consumed cannabis, so they're designing, they're making these devices, but no one there is testing it the same way that they would be testing them in America. So the cycles of testing the products and the hardware are much longer than they need to be. And I know this because I've had these manufacturers like just show up at my doorstep in America and ask me like, hey, you've bought our product, how does it really work? And I was just flabbergasted that they've been designing these products and they've never used them myself. And I was also flabbergasted.
At your door, you're like, come on in, I'll show you.
That was the weirdest thing, was them showing up at my house, not my office, to do this. And another hurdle that I see, or not necessarily a hurdle, was that when we were first designing vaporizers, getting to the good old one-hitter quitter was kind of like the holy grail. And with dabbing and the VapeXhale, we felt that we had gotten to that point. It's like, well, we're at the one-hitter quitter. Like, that was what all of us was trying to work towards. Now that we're there, what's next? So I think we've pushed the envelope on conductive heating. We've pushed the envelope on convective heating. Some people are doing inductive heating right now, but I think it's more of, I mean, most of the induction devices are conduction by way of induction, so it's a little bit less efficient, in my opinion. So I think there's going to have to be another paradigm shift, and, you know, I'm hoping I'm the guy that thinks about the next paradigm.
I can make a prediction. So I guess, like, you know, we don't have a ton of time left, but shifting gears, you know, as it stands, California cannabis regs consider disposable vape pen and empty cartridges basically hazardous waste. Yet the laws don't accommodate manufacturers like myself or like Casey or really anybody up here, you know, from instituting any kind of recycling programs due to this cannabis residue. And there's not really a lot of scientific information right now on the environmental impacts of e-cigarette manufacturing, of e-cigarette use, and e-cigarette disposal. This information is very limited, and there is a growing concern, I know, within the industry and also within the consumer base about like what environmental impact these batteries and components have on our landfill, or in the case of someone who doesn't own a vessel pen, just discard it indiscriminately into the environment without any real thought at all. I mean, real quick, like, what do you guys think that we can do as an industry to, you know, kind of address this and minimize these negative environmental impacts of these products?
You know, that's a very salient question. That was one of the reasons why I didn't want to design a vape pen, was because of, well, you know, having kids, you really worry about the planet in a different way than I think before you have kids, or at least for me. And I got to give this guy, Mitchell Colbert, right here in the front row, a lot of props here, because 3 years ago he interviewed me about the safety of vape pens, and the article only came out earlier this year, but he was doing a lot of research in this area to really find out, you know, what is true, what is just fear-mongering, and ultimately he's put me in touch with a company that will recycle portions of your cartridge. I've also been searching far and wide. I found another company called Carts for Art, where they will take the cartridges.
Awesome.
They will have young kids.
Upcycling.
Yeah, young kids create art out of these cartridges, sell the art, and then give the proceeds to the child that made the pieces of art. So while that's not a perfect solution, I feel like, you know,
People are getting creative. You know, you don't solve problems like this, people are going to solve them themselves. And
No, exactly.
I do look forward to a day when the solving the problem isn't just like, well, make it someone else's problem, throw it out a window.
Exactly. So I think we got, you know, it's always like a crawl, walk, run, but we're at the in between the crawl and walk phase.
For sure. Casey?
Yeah. So I think like with us, you know, there's a couple things. One is there are some companies that do recycling. Like we found a company called Gaica based in Greenfield. Yeah, great guys. And we've been able to get all of the technical specs from S'more, who manufactures C-Cell products, and send it to Gaica to analyze so that they can break down the different waste streams and recycle as much of it as possible. So we are actually finalizing our recycling program based on this like process. So that'll be one thing, right? And driving consumers back and say, hey, don't dispose of it, bring it back to the shop, and incentivizing them. But we can't really ignore the fact that not everyone's going to do that, right? So you really can capture so much. I think the other way to do this is to offset. And maybe you're not going to be able to get everybody to bring back their disposable, but maybe you can do something else to help the environment, right? So like for us, one of the options and that we're moving forward with is joining 1% for the Planet, which is an organization that was started by the founders of Patagonia. Essentially what they do is they take a large group of companies, they all pledge 1% of their profits towards environmental causes. And that's something that we can do to help offset the impact that we're having while we don't have those avenues to necessarily recycle every disposable or recycle every cartridge.
I mean, I think it's great that, when you feel like you have to do something but don't know what to do, that there are these avenues and channels for people to take to do something that's meaningful, toward the issue. And then Jesse.
Yeah, I think for us, we've run into a lot of the same issues, right? And for us, we spend a lot of time trying to find recycle partners, and we run into this whole thing where, we're lucky enough we can sell our product in all 50 states, but then how do we get it back? Because now it has cannabis residue on it, and you can't put that through the mail, and
Right.
And that's a big hurdle that we've faced because while California is our biggest market, it certainly doesn't encompass every device that we sell, and so. I think Casey's point was right that we have to be looking for offset measures wherever we can, and part of that is finding fantastic partners who you can work with. For us, it comes down to the things that we can do in our packaging, the things that we can do in our production process, the components that are inside of our devices, the way that we communicate and educate our consumers as well as a piece of that. And then ultimately, it comes down to all of us banding together and pushing for regulation that will allow us to, at the very least, offset some of the environmental impacts that we can't avoid.
For sure. And I think that I'll kind of add to that, we can also kind of count on all you guys because at the end of the day, everybody votes with their dollars. And, if people know better, I like to think that they do better. And so, as people are more conscious about their spending habits, and if people have an issue about certain products winding up in a landfill, if there's less demand for those products, there'll be less of those products in the landfill. So it's just kind of food for thought for everybody. We do have literally just a couple of minutes. I hope to have a little bit more time for Q&A. I'm sure there's a lot of Q in this day and age, but we can maybe take a couple of questions. Yes, sir. Cartridge compatibility issues and voltage settings. And so are you wondering how to address that with your customers, or are you just kind of presenting that's a challenge in the industry because we do have, some devices don't accommodate certain diameters, 510 cartridges tend to be, they build themselves as ubiquitous. That means the threading itself is ubiquitous, but it doesn't mean the devices are ubiquitous. And I'd agree that there is a lack of standardization. Voltages is something that's really difficult for the consumer to understand, and really how does that translate to heat, and more importantly, how does that heat translate to a vaping experience? And this is something that, at the end of the day, it seems like a lot of that falls on the consumer to kind of sort out.
Yeah, and the voltage and impedance is it's a very tricky equation. Some of the batteries are 3.6 volts, some are 2.4, some are 3.1, and the cartridges might have different impedances. So depending on which brand's battery you have and the cartridge that you're matching it up with, there could be some inconsistencies in performance. And we've gotten a lot of flack for having a closed loop system, but it was essentially to solve this problem, which is when you put the pod into our battery, it auto-calibrates the temperature for you, so you don't have to worry about impedance, voltage, or entering temperature settings, and really kind of dumb it down and make it easy for the consumer.
Yeah, and I know, like with my Vessel device, they have now you get to choose between just a few settings, and you learn very quickly, that okay, there's this dance that I do between vapor production and flavor, and I get to choose. And so it's a lot easier for me to choose between, yellow, blue, and purple versus, 223, votes at X number of ohms at,
Right, and I think something that we at least spent some time doing, and I know other people in the industry have done as well, is sort of looking at the bell curve of what voltage settings accommodate the majority of oils that are out there that are most popularly consumed, and that's ultimately where we've landed our voltage settings, and they tend to be lower, so as not to impede flavor and the consumption experience overall. And I think allowing people flexibility and exploration, right, and encouraging that if you're talking to consumers every day. It's the same way that you can't say that this one oil is going to affect you this one way, one oil in one pen on one voltage setting, it's not always going to be the same. So you have to encourage exploration a little bit, I think, too.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that people have fun doing it. Well, I know we are at the end of our road here. I'm going to try to take liberty and squeeze one more question. Mitchell?
Thank you for that question. I know it's not a softball for me, but that's how we designed our pods so that way they could be easily disassembled. The parts that had residue could be discarded, and the other parts that could be recycled could be easily recycled. And that was an important part for me to, ethically, get past the hurdle of, what are we going to be doing with all these empty pods and cartridges? So I appreciate that question.
And I guess for anybody else that is wondering, what's going to happen to all this stuff, I mean, start asking these questions. Like, ask your regulators, ask manufacturers at shows like this, and ask the industry and let people know that these problems really do need to be solved. Indeed, indeed. Yeah, we'll throw those out for you. Oh, for sure. And again, it comes right back down to, I mean, time and again, without having the federal regulatory oversight that's required to kind of really bring this stuff together, it really comes down to us carving out these new territories and, being educated and thoughtful about, how we engage in this industry. I think we are about out of time. Yeah, absolutely agreed. That's a really good point. Yeah, for sure. And again, it just illustrates that, the cannabis industry can no longer be an island. I mean, this is going to have to get folded in, with some sort of thought and sensibility. So, and you guys being here today and having these conversations is, really the biggest step toward that happening. So really from the bottom of my heart, I thank you guys all for being here and participating. I encourage you to keep these conversations going when you walk out this door. And I think my pleasure, my pleasure. All right, and thank you guys so much for being here.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, New West, for bringing us together. You guys are great. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.